sustainability. Sundus just sent the notice about recording. I'm okay for that recording, and that's nice to have it available afterwards. So we're going to go over a couple of key and hopefully easy takeaways and how we can all improve our food sustainability this evening. But I'm going to build from a kind of build a story about food sustainability along the way. Just to introduce myself, I know you're all familiar with Sundus, but for myself, I'm on the HEN Board of Directors. I'm also a retired environmental scientist that have been working in the field for over 30 years in all sorts of the aspects of environment, from stormwater management, air quality, climate change, green buildings, sustainable transportation. So I'm happy to be sharing some of that information now with you tonight. So why don't we get going? I think we have Elizabeth, Sophia, Dawn, Isabel, Angelica, and Palak on the line tonight. I might ask for some interaction. So if you want to use chat, that's fine. If you want to unmute and speak up, that would be fine too. We start most of our presentations at HEN with our land acknowledgement. So I'm going to start this evening that way as well. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this already, but it bears repeating for sure. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect all the creation gives to us with life, to provide us with life. This includes the land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. The Anishinaabe peoples have utilized this land for millennia, and we would like to acknowledge their direct descendants, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land upon which we live, work, and conduct ourselves. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and these original peoples by expressing both our gratitude and respect. Intertwined with this history is the 400-year impact of forced migration and enslavement, as well as the subsequent ongoing contributions of peoples of African descent to this same land. Collectively, we wish to acknowledge the economic and cultural contributions of both the Indigenous and African populations to this land. We are grateful to those who have endured, and we are committed to respecting this rich and intersectional heritage from the pre-contact history of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee to our modern day. This land is rich in stories and customs of its diverse inhabitants. In the spirit and intent of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, we will collectively care for and respect the land, water, animals, and each other in the interests of peace and friendship, and for the benefit of not only ourselves, but of our future descendants. Now we'll dive into the topic. I know that many of you are familiar with Halton Environmental Network. Some of you have attended workshops before for Jen Green and have, been involved with Jen Green. But we have a nonpartisan approach, which means that we don't have a bias attached to our work. We have charitable status, and we're not for profit organization. And we really want to create a community of educated and engaged stakeholders for climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, and environmental sustainability. Getting into food sustainability, we really need to ask ourselves, why is this important? And it is often misunderstood how easy it is to support better food sustainability in our everyday lives. Food sustainability relates to what we choose to eat and how we deal with our food at every step of its trip, from where it comes from to where it goes after we're done with it, and whether it creates greenhouse gas emissions locally and globally. Now, Halton Environmental Network has been working in this food and gardening space for quite some time. We have uh, looked after the Halton Food Program, and we have several projects every year ongoing that educate residents about sustainable food production, promoting access to local, healthy, culturally relevant food through environmentally sustainable community gardening, urban farming, and school gardens. Now, getting into food sustainability, sorry, I'm just going to check the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, I didn't. So we're going to start with, where does our food come from? How does where does it go, and can I garden? And we also need to remember some important statistics. Um, a third of the food raised or prepared does not make it from the farm or the factory to people's plates and forks. Producing uneaten food waste wastes many of the resources that go into raising and growing it, wastes the seeds, energy, water, land, fertilizer, hours of labor, and financial capital attached with producing food. And food production generates greenhouse gases at every stage, including methane when organic matter lands in waste sites around the world. Food waste is responsible for roughly 8% of global GHG emissions. And this is both an issue in high and low income countries. And we certainly in Canada cannot discount our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions through the food waste that we produce. We also have shown in some of these, in one of the photos the screen that we're looking at right now, just how much food comes in, even to the local grocery store, that does not make it out the door. It's not sold. The items are bumped or bruised or slightly irregular looking, and people prefer not to buy this. And I think that this is something that we all need to understand is an area where we can focus. We can understand where our food comes from. Does it come from close by? Does it come from far away? And where does it go? Does it go from a local farm to the local farmer's market? Or does it go from a local farm halfway around the world? And I think we all can be asking ourselves, especially when we think of the options to make our food as local as possible, can I garden? Breaking down the question to make it as easy as possible to understand what we can do to improve our food sustainability is really, when we go shopping, where we choose to shop, are our foods coming from close by or from far away? And if it's far away, how far away? And does our food come from meat, or does it come from plants? And all of these things are extremely important when you're making food choices and trying to relate them to the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with them. If you look at an apple, is it local? Does it come from 25 kilometers away? And is it driven by a truck, a fairly short distance to get to a farmer's market, and then from a farmer's market into our homes? Or is it a pistachio from California that travels over 4,000 kilometers in a plastic bag often to get to our homes for a snack or for cooking? These are simple questions we can ask ourselves with every food item that we buy. The distance makes a big difference in the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with any food item. Transportation, whether it's by truck or train or air, they all generate greenhouse gas emissions. And the distance plays a huge part. Rail is one of the most efficient forms of transportation, but often what we see are produce coming up from, say, southern Florida in refrigerated trucks. And trucks have generally more higher greenhouse gas emissions associated with their tailpipe. The other thing is that, are we carnivores? Do we prefer meat or do we like the vegetarian food and prefer plants? Plants do use less GHGs in terms of growing and even transportation. And they produce less methane and gases than animals, with increasing amounts of methane produced as you move from chickens to pigs to cows. Cows are very efficient methane producers. And that's something that we can bring into consideration when we're making food choices and what to put on our plate and what to cook. How do we do better? Now, some of this many of you already understand, but it's becoming especially important now to understand the decision to buy local. And sometimes it comes down to reading the labels, and it is definitely not the easiest thing to do as we go into the grocery store. Grocery stores are getting much, much better in labeling where food is coming from. For instance, there is a move for many, many grocery stores now to buy local, to buy Canadian second, and then to buy from other places third. And you're seeing more and more of a shift right now as we are seeing a surge across Canada in a preference for buying Canadian. And that's not, saying that one way or another. It means it is important to read labels. And sometimes it is not easy to understand where our food items are coming from. As an instance, if you go in and buy a package of romaine lettuce right now, romaine lettuce at this time of year is coming from somewhere in the United States, likely California or Florida or Mexico. But that's as detailed as it gets right now. And, if it comes from a Mexican border, that's fairly close to where they're growing romaine in California. So it's based on the information that you find on the label. And then you can make your decision and understand how many food miles are attached to any particular food item. Also, an important thing that we can do is buying in season. Now, I have to tell you, if you like bananas, Canada does not have a season. No bananas season for us. However, there can be, we can have bananas from very, very far away or somewhat closer. But buying in season becomes really, really important if we can look to farmers market and what are growing all around us. We've got apples, we've got grapes, we've got even blueberries. We've got many, many food items grown locally. And we are extremely privileged to live in an area that has still a strong agricultural base and have so many of our local produce produced locally. But again, buying in season. Now, in terms of trying to buy apples in the middle of winter, that is possible to find Ontario apples because apples are one of those fruits that if stored carefully, it can last into the winter months. The other thing that you can do is if you like certain things, like when we are in tomato season, you can extend the use of local Ontario grown tomatoes by putting them in uh, canning or making spaghetti sauce and freezing it. And then you're still extending the use of that local fruit and vegetable by just thinking ahead and preparing food in a way that will last throughout the fall and winter. Another way to approach things is by drawing that big circle of 100 miles around where you live and trying to eat foods that are prepared or are grown within that 100-mile diet. We should put kilometers, so say like 150 kilometers, 170 kilometers. That's another way that we can start to really learn how we can make choices about reducing the number of food miles attached to the food that we cook and put on our plate. Going into meat versus plants, we can look at potentially meatless Mondays or, pick another day or two and see if we can shift at least a bit to reducing the amount of meat that we're consuming. The higher you go up on the food chain in terms of what we eat, the more greenhouse gas emissions are associated with the production of that food. I'll just make a mention of a reference. There is a 100-mile diet book. It is, dated now, 2007, but it documents the journey of two Canadians, Elisa Smith and J.B. McKinnon, and they were focused on local farmers markets, and there are actually even local fish farms. So they focused their diet on fish, chicken, root vegetables, berries, and corn, and they preserved their food for use over the winter. So that's a very interesting read if any of you want to check into that experience by Alyssa and JB. Now, we all know that if we are looking where um, what we have on our plate, that is again another point where we can make decisions. All of these decisions influence how much greenhouse gas emissions are related to our food. Now, will we eat it all? Are we going to eat everything on our plate? Will we eat some? And let's get into food waste. And I am going to focus on that in the next few slides after that so we can understand the importance of how reducing food waste can be a significant effort and deal with a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with food. We can eat better. We can put less on our plate and go for second helpings. That leaves what isn't on our plate and that we may not have eaten in a place where we can save it for leftovers. And I do not know about your personal preference, but I have to say in our house, we have generally one or two leftover dinners where we're starting to call it, we eat to the back of the fridge. So whatever leftovers we've had from the last 3 or 4 dinners, it's kind of like a mosh pit. Like it's really kind of a very different dinner, but we eat our leftovers. We also plan meals and shop for the plan. A lot of times when we're shopping, we buy too much food and the food goes bad before we get a chance to eat it. And even though it means, again, a balance between maybe shopping a bit more often or wasting food if you buy too much and you don't get to it, that's the balance that we have to think about. If you're shopping more locally at your closest grocery store, that balance can be huge in favor of shopping a bit more frequently or planning out your meals for the week and only shop for your meal plan. This can be a real cost cost saver. I know that you have all, I'm sure, experienced times when you've got a whole whack of lettuce that just didn't make it to when you were going to eat it. So the cost savings with the high price of food right now can be significant if you start to do that planning. And again, I'll go back to eating to the back of the fridge or the freezer, is don't forget the value of freezing leftovers, or using the freezer as an option when you are buying something and you realize it's been too much. For instance, a lot of people don't know that you can freeze cheese, you can freeze cold meat. If a package of cold meat is unopened and you're not going to get to it by the best by date, then put it in the freezer and take it out when you're ready to use it. The other thing that we can do is a lesser uh, option, but it can still be very helpful, is to compost our food waste. And then at least our food waste is turned into a beneficial soil amendment. We are also very lucky to have a very robust compost program with Halton region. And it is important to understand what can be composted and what cannot be composted. A lot of things can be composted. For instance, a lot of paper products that come in touch with food, if they are paper, put it in the compost. That's a good balance between your nitrogen food items and your carbon food items, and it makes compost smell a little bit less organic when things start to decay. You can put your wasted Kleenexes, or if you are using paper towels, they can all go into the compost. Now, I really do want to dig into food waste. Food decomposition, when it breaks down, it produces methane, and that has 25 times greater impact than carbon dioxide. So it is a huge impact on climate change. These are GHGs of the worst kind. And so what you can do at a household level, the power of one adds to the power of another one, and it starts to really add up in terms of the benefits that we can see. We did, Halton Environmental Network did a study on food waste, what you call food loss, discarded during the preparation of cooking meals. And there are it's good to understand that there's avoidable food waste, and then there's sometimes unavoidable food waste. There are things like, in this picture shows it very well, you've got fish bones and old apple cores and banana peels. And then you've got the food waste where you've got overripe bananas that maybe nobody wants to eat. We've got past expiry date for things like, cereal. And then you've got the leftovers that, instead of being saved off the plate, go into the food bin or the compost. And we need to understand that this is a situation, and this shows that most food waste is avoidable. So therefore it offers great opportunities to minimize both the economic loss, which we experience when we throw good food away because it's past due, or we're choosing not to eat it, and environmental impact of both food and beverages. And this is a result of our individual behavior. And as individuals, it's our behavior. So we did a study with VCM International. We really dove into food loss and waste, and we really wanted to understand the specific local greenhouse gas emissions associated with food waste. This was done in Oakville. So these numbers should speak to us in Halton, throughout Halton. Our work was called Make Every Bite Count. We have the technical report posted on our website, and it was funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation. This was done in 2019 and 2020 and collected with some volunteers, community volunteers, collected actual data about what food was purchased and what food was used and what food was wasted. And it was over a 7-day period of time, and it was really, really interesting findings that that came through. Going back to avoidable and unavoidable, it looked like what for the respondents, because I think that they were, I would say, informed. The unavoidable preparation waste was 58%, and the avoidable waste was 42%. Now, this is typically not a specific example. It's not what you would. It's not maybe what you would expect for people who weren't even thinking about dealing with food waste. But what we have of that avoidable waste, 26% was spoiled food, and 16% was plate waste. Interestingly, the spoiled food included food that reached its best before date before, or its quality had deteriorated so that it wasn't considered fit to eat. Overripe fruit and stale bread. Interestingly, the highest food waste occurred on Sunday, and the lowest average food waste occurred on Tuesday. I'm not sure we dug into why that was so, but if we maybe look at, Sunday dinners in our own homes, you might be able to make a relationship with that. So and that is what was found. Usually large family dinners are prepared on Sundays, and they also lead to more plate waste and a higher number of leftovers. The second was due to families cleaning out the fridge prior to the working week. So that was another interesting thing on Sunday is that people look at their fridge and think, what's not going to make it into the week? And then that's when they clean out their fridge. The most common food items in the spoiled food were vegetables. Now, this again dove into the data a little bit more, and you can see it here. Most of that food waste by food type was in the fruit and vegetable area. Grains were next, with very little sugar and syrups. They last a longer time, fewer dairy and eggs, some meat, less fish and seafood, and then, as I mentioned, by a very large amount, 68% were fruit and vegetables. So 26 individuals participated in the study, and 11 of the 26 interviewers stated the results were reasonably close to what they expected. 15 were surprised at the findings, and 5 expected their food waste to be higher than the results showed. And quite a few were very, very surprised at overall the results of food waste across the board. They were also 53% were surprised by the amount of preparation waste and the types of waste that they experienced when they really started to look and put aside the food waste that they were creating. And so that's kind of something we can consider when we're making choices. Fruit and vegetables are some of the most expensive items that we buy. And of course, meat is very, very expensive. So we can see benefits if we're dealing and trying to lower the amount of food waste by using the foods as we buy them. The percentage of avoidable food waste by CO2 is, again, this relates directly to the greenhouse gas emissions used to produce meat and poultry over the greenhouse gas emissions used to produce fruit and vegetables. So when you look back at the food waste that shows the meat as only 11% of the food waste, when you look at the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that waste, 68% of the greenhouse gas emissions in your food waste come from that meat and poultry section. Again, helping us get into why these are very, important, helps us understand what behaviors we can change and look at, where we've got opportunities for improvement. For breakfast, the avoidable food waste is on the bottom. The avoidable food waste is on the top, is orange. So at breakfast, there are less avoidable food waste. That you think of the things that you're eating for breakfast and those choices. It seems to go up at lunch for some reason, where you have more avoidable food waste. And then for dinner and snacks, the amount of avoidable food waste is somewhat similar. For breakfast, unavoidable seemed like banana peels, apple cores, and eggshells, but the yogurt, for example, avoidable, yogurt had reached its best before date. As an example of the lunch, avoidable banana peels, unavoidable banana peels, avoidable uneaten sandwiches, some of which returned home in lunch boxes. For dinner, an example of unavoidable food waste, vegetable peelings and meat trimmings. And examples of avoidable waste, excess rice, bagged salads that had reached their best before dates. So you pay a price in greenhouse gas emissions when you're buying convenience packaged food items. For snacks, unavoidable food waste or things like orange peelings and apple cores, but avoidable food waste are, again, uneaten sandwiches and stale bread. Again, looking at what kind of food waste is attached to each kind of food item. We've got prep waste in green, plate waste in that kind of light red, and spoiled food in the red, clear red. And this is where you can see the prep waste attached to each type of food item. It looks like fruit and veg have most prep waste, and grains have the lowest prep waste. We can think of, chopping up peppers and you take out the core. That has more food waste than preparing rice, as an example. So this information is something that we can take away and start to look at and try to relate it to how you are dealing in your home with meat and poultry. As the prep waste is 40%, but then plate waste is 36%. Fish and seafood plate waste is 44%. That means we're taking fish and seafood, putting it on our plate, and then not eating it. And again, grains, it looks like has more spoiled food, but grains may be an opportunity where you're cooking only as much as you need and not more than that. Now, to really get into this, we created an infographic. The create an infographic to try to represent a lot of the information. And what we're trying to understand is we all have our carbon footprint. What can we do to learn about the impact of improving on our food waste? How to reduce our carbon footprint is a nice little recap. You plan ahead, purchase only what you need, learn about the proper storage of the food items that you buy, organize your fridge. Everything seems to get shoved to the back of the fridge. Make sure you've got things in coming to the forefront, or that you have a good information on what's in your fridge. Freeze as much as possible. As I mentioned, cheese and cold meat can be frozen if they're getting near their best before dates, and only take them out when you're ready to use them. Save leftovers and put them in your meal plan rotation. Have a leftover night. Compost when possible, and then also be mindful of the meal portions, and try to make sure that what you're putting on your plate, you're prepared to eat. And there's always around our table is our saying. I've got grandchildren, is, it's okay. You don't have to fill your plate. Take what you think you can eat, and there will be second helpings. We have the options in terms of planning ahead or learning about how to use leftovers. Learn new recipes. As an example, you can have a rotisserie chicken that you have with a dinner, but you can also use the rest of that rotisserie chicken, and you can do pulled chicken. You can shred it, reheat it. You can put it into soup, or you can make it into a chicken salad and put it in a whole wheat tortilla with cheese, or cheese and veggies for lunch. So learning to these recipes that build on leftovers is really an important way that you can deal with what could become food waste. The other thing is that organizing your fridge and learning about proper storage. It's really good to keep your apples together, because when you put them with other fruits, and vegetables, they tend to make those ripen more quickly. It's learning about our food, and that all that learning can help us deal with our food more sustainably. There are lots and lots of points that I could go over here, but I'm not going to go over all of those. And again, the one of the things that we're really starting to focus on, because there's continuous improvement, is what we should all seek. Even if you've been doing, sustainability work for a long time, like I have, and within my family, it is always good to go back and look at how you can do better. And one of the things that we were dealing with, because I've got, sometimes 8 people coming over for dinner regularly, is that we're managing the leftovers much better. And some of the leftovers are going out the door to my son's family, so that my granddaughters can take them happily for lunch to their high school the next day. We can also see that before you even go shopping, as part of your meal planning, see what is in your fridge, see what is in your freezer, and see what is in your pantry. And eat to the back of your fridge, freezer, and pantry. And that means setting your meal plan not based on just the front of your fridge, but dig into your back and see what is back there. So what it comes down to really is making good choices. It is behavior and attitudinal in terms of how we deal with our food. After the people went through this study, they made more conscious decisions. They eat more meal leftovers. They've changed their food prep and food management. They have factored into food waste considerations when they are shopping. And they are looking at more thought to using rather than discarding food. And paying close attention to the best before dates before the best before date. Another thing that we can do is to have less focus on pack size, bulk sales, and best before dates. Actually, this is what we need to consider. So sometimes you can buy a bigger pack. It's more economical. But if we do not eat 6 heads of romaine lettuce in a week, then maybe buying the 3-pack rather than the 6-pack is the way to go. Because when you have to throw out 2 heads of romaine lettuce because it's gone bad before you used it, then that's actually not a savings at all by buying a bigger pack. Bulk sales, again, same thing. When you go to Costco, sometimes it's very difficult when you have a lot of, say, grape tomatoes, if you're purchasing tomatoes there. Watching, of course, trying to buy as locally as possible. But if you're not going to buy or use grape tomatoes a lot over the next 2 weeks, maybe buy a smaller size and then use them all and not waste half of a big container. And then when you're buying, read the best before dates before you buy them, because sometimes the grocery stores are not. I know they try to, but sometimes it happens that things are on the shelf that have a best before date that is only tomorrow. And if the best before date is tomorrow, then understand that that is a good thing to know, because you should be using it as a food item the very next day. Now, what really brings it home is the fact that all of these add up for Oakville, for the small population. There are 23,675 MTCO, with greenhouse gas emissions, per year attached to the food waste. That's significant. That's just Oakville. If you add that up to all of our municipalities, all of our citizens across Canada, that becomes a very, very large number. Now, I'm going to shift from food waste, because you've probably heard enough about it, because that's one of my pet projects here, is to really have us understand the importance of food waste and how can we bring our food closer to us. And I'm going to just turn off my video right now because my line's unstable. My signal's unstable. Can I garden? And can I have a home garden, or can I have be part of a community garden? Halton has community gardens all over. Find your local community garden and see if there's an ability to rent one. In Oakville. Oakville rents community gardens, but also there are local community gardens. Say in Halton Hills, there's the Acton Community Garden. In some of our local faith-based organizations, there are community gardens for their congregations. And if we can have a food garden, how complex does it need to be? It really, starting small by buying a tomato plant that is kind of a very productive tomato plant, is a good place to start. There's container gardening. There are raised beds. You can You can make your own raised bed to really create a nice gardening area in a very small space. And then you can start to plant what you like to eat. You can tomatoes are quite easy to grow, as are our herbs like basil and cilantro and dill. And you can also try to look for the most uh, local types of these say vegetables, for example. We try to promote in Hen the use of heritage tomatoes, and there are places around that are now where you're able to buy heritage tomato seeds or heritage tomato starter plants. And then one of the best feelings is to go out into your garden, harvest some lettuce, and I've grown lots of lettuce. Harvest some lettuce, wash it up, and put it right in your salad and on the table. There's not a better feeling to get from your garden to your table. It really makes a great connection. It's also other reasons why it might be nice to try a garden. It's being outside promotes wellness. It also improves mental health. Green spaces are documented to improve mental health. Getting outside is a good thing. It's some exercise, and it gives very equitably more access to fresh food. So, with that, I am going to open it up to questions and answers now. I'm going to put the chat up so I can see any chat coming in. What are your thoughts on the presentation? What are your oh, thanks, Sundus, for putting the link to the Every Bite Counts in the chat. Who has some question? Dawn, do you have a question?
You actually. Thank you for your presentation. That was so informative. I just want to ask, like, how exactly were you able to conduct the report? Because it was like really detailed. Did you just ask
Yeah,
people to do a survey on themselves, or did you like actually
yeah,
monitor people's food waste?
yes. So um, uh, we put a call out to gather as many people as we could over, a certain time. And we got people to come in and volunteer to do this 1 week intensive study. So they were they were brought in, they were provided a toolkit so they knew what we wanted them to do in terms of the food and food waste. They had scales to measure the food waste, and they had a survey work for every meal where they would break down what they had served, as well as the food waste attached to every meal. As you see, the data is very, very rich. And if you go into that report, the methodology is documented very fully. I can't go into it now um, because it is extensive. But people volunteered to do the study, and then they were trained how to do the study, and then they provided the information from their work and their survey work. We also provided them tools like scales and a constant communication um, if they were running into trouble. And that's how you get such a rich data set to uh, break down and work on. Does that provide you enough information, Dawn? I really recommend reading the report. It's heavy reading, mind you, but good science is.
Yeah, thank you.
Palak, I see your question. Um, how long do you wait to harvest the veggies, and how tips on how to get the best harvests. That's a whole presentation in itself, because each type of vegetable has its own growing time. So there are, for instance, the if you put in lettuce, it's nice to get in lettuce as soon as the soil is thawed, but lettuce doesn't do well in our very, very hot summer. So the sooner you get your lettuce plants in, or your lettuce seeds in, the longer you will have lettuce. But when you get into 30-degree weather, that's really, really tough on lettuce. They're a little more of a cool type plant. Um, you can push the growing season by starting your little plants from seeds indoors. And you can um, and you can see them online if you do kind of a little Google search. Like you can have little seed starter uh, trays, and the little seed starter trays need a nice, happy place in the sun in order to start their journey from seed to plant that you would transfer outside. Some of the tomatoes, if you buy a plant that has already been pre, um, uh, let's say, started from seed, and is also a plant that is already producing tomatoes, like the little grape tomatoes, you can buy those plants and then you can start harvesting them right away. Harvesting a tomato is usually, depending on the type of tomato, there are brown tomatoes, green tomatoes, yellow tomatoes, red tomatoes. But if you're buying a variety that's a red tomato, the tomato will be ready to harvest when it is really red. So a red tomato will go through times where it looks kind of a greenish color and then it turns red. So each type of vegetable has its own time from when you plant it to when you harvest it. So it gets pretty specific, but it doesn't hurt to start things like an herb garden. Herb gardens you can buy kind of container kits, or you can buy a little herb garden just at your local garden center. And the local garden center, um, if you buy kind of a tray of herbs, you just snip those herbs as you are using them, and they will keep growing all summer. You can also keep your little herb tray going all year. And if you keep it in the right uh, sun, and you don't let them get like super cold, you can put them on a windowsill, and then you can harvest some of those herbs year round. Um, so I'm sorry that that's not kind of a very specific answer, a plaque about, you know, how long you have to wait. I have some friends who have those little seedlings growing all over their dining room table. They would be covered right now, waiting to go out into their gardens over uh, you know, March and April. And then they can be planted from wherever you're growing them inside, and put them in sometime in late April, early to late May, when the ground really warms up. So, Palak, I hope I gave you some clues there that will help give you at least a little bit of guidance and where to look for some information as well. Look for something your family likes, and then start researching a little bit on that, and then don't get too complicated too quickly. Angelica, there are local gardens that you recommend, or food brands that are locally sourced. Where I would recommend everybody starts is at their local farmers market. And I'm not sure where all of you are living, but that is some of the best that is really the best place to see what is grown locally. Um, the For community gardens, that's something a little bit different. Each municipality will have a community garden spot on its website, and they will let you know where some of those community gardens are based on your municipality. Uh, the community gardens that we operate, they're listed on our website, and there are always lots of opportunities to volunteer at the community gardens. For example, Acton Community Garden up in Halton Hills looks for community volunteers to come and help manage that garden with Halton Environmental Network staff. So there's a transfer of information on how to, start by planting and then harvesting over the spring and summer and into the early fall for some of the community gardens that we're involved with. In terms of the local farmers market, that's also a quick search. I know Georgetown has a regular farmers market. The Oakville does, Burlington does, and to find those specific times, they you can just look on each municipality's website because they are the a lot of farmers will come in, and the other thing that you gain by going into farmers markets is that local bakers, local food producers also come in. So you can start to find some of those food products that where people have got their kind of home businesses or small local businesses, and they bring their products in. And by that, I'm saying that jams, jellies, even baking, gluten-free baking. There are so many places that will now come into farmers market. You can really learn about local options by starting with the farmers markets. Now, they generally will start in late April. So it doesn't hurt to start researching where you could maybe go to find a farmer's market. The problem with farmer's market, be, the problems begin with trying not to buy too much because there's so much delicious food there. You have to really look to that meal plan and try to make sure that you are only buying what you're going to need because the food is very fresh. It's often not preserved, and that means you need to have a plan to use it. The other thing that you can get at farmers markets, and especially in the very, very early days, are you can buy seedlings. So some of the markets, some of the farmers, that is their business. They will grow heritage tomato plants from seed, and in the farmers market, they will bring in those seedlings at a time when they're ready to go right into your garden. And that makes it a little bit easier. And again, they're local sources. Angelica, I hope that answers your question. Thanks. And thanks, Black. That was good. Any other questions? You can tell I'm passionate, right? Um, I'm a hobbyist gardener, um, really focused on always trying personally to do better and trying to lead my family on that journey, right from, my mom who's like 84 years old to my granddaughters who are, 14. Hi, Dawn.
It's really interesting. I love the tips that you shared. Can you share a bit about how you think that like food waste and gardening would relate to our theme for Generation Green this year, which is energy efficiency?
Yes, so that's very interesting because the what you are seeing in some of the local businesses, and I have to say, um, I am I am on my own personal journey to buy locally and Canadian. And I just bought prepared mustard from a maker in Prince Edward Island. Now, that may seem far away, but we don't have a lot of mustard makers close that I'm aware of. The farm that it comes from in PEI uses all green energy. And so they actually list that they're, as a local small business, and a very with sustainable framework that they have built their business around. Energy, the energy that goes into the production of their food product is from green sources. And more local makers are trying to represent the energy that goes into their food item or their food production. And so that is something to look at in terms of even how you would create or compare a farm that has green energy production on their lands, because many farmers took advantage of the solar panel installation, and farms also have land to use groundwater, uh, ground source heat pumps, and they have tried to deal with the reduction in their energy. Um, so you can compare a farm that doesn't have green energy sources with a farm that has green energy sources, because right away there is a reduction in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions attached to the food items that they produce, just by virtue of the energy that they use to either grow or produce what they are producing. So does that make sense to you, Dawn, in terms of energy, food, food, to raise crops, to raise cattle uses energy. You have to keep the lights on. To milk cows, you have to use the milkers. Not a lot of cows are milked by hand anymore. And so that all uses energy. And so a lot of the farmers are using green energy sources, and then some aren't. What's the difference in terms of greenhouse gas emissions attached to that food item?
That is really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
I will mention that if you have any further questions, you can send them in through Sundus, and I'll happily, try to provide an answer if you think of something in the next day or so. Okay, Sundus, I think if there aren't any other questions,
Yeah, I think if there aren't any more questions, so we can wrap up. Thanks, Cindy, for doing this webinar. I think it was really informative, and I know a lot of projects are focusing on food. There are a few projects that are focusing on food, so hopefully this would help them. So thank you for that.
great. And really,
Thank
thank you very much for coming out tonight and to for spending the time to learn about, opportunities to have, more sustainable food.